Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 306 of the podcast. And on this episode, I'm talking about baseball agent Scott Boras. Most fans do not know the name of sports agents. We know they exist, but they're for the most part mysterious figures. The most prominent sports agent of the last 30 years is without a doubt baseball super agent Scott Boras. Just to give you a picture of how big a deal this guy is, he's negotiated for some big names, including in 1992 pitcher Greg Maddux went to the Braves for 5 years, $28 million, a then record. And then Maddux again re-signed with the Braves in 97 for $57 million, at the time making him the highest paid pitcher. In 98, pitcher Kevin Brown with the Dodgers signed a 7-year, $105 million deal. In 2000, Alex Rodriguez broke the bank with the Texas Rangers, a then 10-year, $252 million deal, a record for a sports contract. 7 years later, A-Rod opted out and re-signed with the New York Yankees for 10 years, $275 million. In 2008, first baseman Mark Teixeira signed an 8-year, $180 million deal with the Yankees. In 2012, first baseman Prince Fielder signed with the Tigers for 9 years, $214 million. In 2015, pitcher Max Scherzer signed with the Nationals for 7 years, $210 million. And in 2019, outfielder Bryce Harper signed with the Phillies for 13 years and $330 million. All of these deals were negotiated by Scott Boras, and so many more that I don't have enough time to mention them all. Scott Boras, as an agent, always seems to get his clients exactly what they want and then some, and does so on his own terms. He's known for waiting out for the offer he thinks his clients deserve, and saying that that has worked for him in the past is a massive understatement. But this offseason, it saw mixed results, as he had 3 notable clients who were free agents. Blake Snell, who was coming off his second career Cy Young Award winner, former MVP Cody Bellinger, who had a career resurgence last season, pitcher Jordan Montgomery, who was a hero for the Texas Rangers during their playoff run. At one point, all 3 of these players were predicted to make well over $150 million each, and instead all 3 basically signed 1-year deals. Bellinger ended up re-signing with the Chicago Cubs for 3 years, $80 million, but there's an opt-out for the first 2 seasons. Blake Snell goes to the San Francisco Giants for 2 years, $62 million, with an opt-out after year 1, and Jordan Montgomery goes to the Diamondbacks for 1 year, $25 million with the vesting option. So the big question here for me is, are these deals about Scott Boras falling off as an agent, or is it about these players themselves? There's a case to be made. It's about the players. Cody Bellinger was great last year, but he has to prove it wasn't just a great year, because remember, this is a guy who had an MVP season for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then he fell off in a big way. I think Cody Bellinger does have something to prove. He has to be great for 2 seasons in a row. It's something he hasn't done since the beginning of his career with the Dodgers. He needs to prove he's consistent. Yes, I thought last year he was an MVP candidate by the end with his run with the Chicago Cubs. He was one of the biggest reasons that team was almost in the playoffs. And in the case of Cody Bellinger, I do believe that there are teams out there who should have made a competitive offer to get him on their team. I'm looking at the Toronto Blue Jays. We all thought the Toronto Blue Jays were going to have a massive offseason. They were in on Shohei Ohtani. A lot of people thought that they were the second team that were in on Ohtani after the Dodgers, and getting Cody Bellinger would have been a good bounce back, because that team has been one of the most disappointing offensive teams in baseball the last 2 seasons. They've been a much better pitching team than a hitting team, and that's insane to say. I mean, that team has legit talent on it. Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I think Cody Bellinger would have made a world of difference. I think the biggest issue was that Cody Bellinger was seeking like an 8 to 9 year deal, and that's just insane. You don't just go from being a really bad hitter. I mean, this was a guy who was having a hard time hitting the Mendoza line the last few years. Yes, he had a great season with the Chicago Chicago Cubs, but he needs to show people that he's a consistent MVP performer from now on. In the case of Jordan Montgomery, he's never won more than 10 games and is only 4 games above 500 during his entire career. I mean, I watched this guy pitch for the New York Yankees for years. Yes, he's going to make his starts, but at times he felt like a number 4, number 5 starter, and I think right now, at best, he is a number 3 starting pitcher. Jordan Montgomery as an ace pitcher does not get me excited. Yes, I think the Texas Rangers should have made an offer to keep him, but no, I don't look at Jordan Montgomery as a guy who should have made $100 million. Is it possible that Jordan Montgomery is the type of guy who's going to have a greater second half of his career than the beginning? Absolutely, but the New York Yankees weren't that impressed with him, the St. Louis Cardinals weren't that impressed with him, and the Texas Rangers did not make it a number 1 priority to retain Jordan Montgomery. And I'm a fan of the Boston Red Sox, and Red Sox fans really wanted Jordan Montgomery. I did not want them to give that guy a boatload of money to be an ace pitcher, because in my heart, I don't believe he is an ace pitcher. He pitched really well during the postseason for the Texas Rangers, but I need to see more of him if I ever want to view him as a number 2. Again, right now, I view him as a number 3 starter on a decent pitching rotation. And that gets us to the most interesting member of this group of Boras clients, Blake Snell. Blake Snell is a 2-time Cy Young Award winner. When you think about pitchers who have won Cy Young Awards, you think of great pitchers, especially ones who have won twice. You think of Randy Johnson, a multiple Cy Young Award winner. You think of Pedro Martinez, a multiple Cy Young Award winner. You think of Greg Maddux, a multiple Cy Young Award winner. And then when you think of Blake Snell, you don't know what to think, because the years that he doesn't win the Cy Young, he's just another pitcher. And I don't want to say his Cy Young Award winning seasons are anomalies, because I think that's an overstatement. There are just years that I almost forget that Blake Snell is pitching, because he's not always elite. He's sometimes just another guy. At some points, he's like Jordan Montgomery. He feels like a number 3 starting pitcher, but he's had these 2 halves of baseball. It was the second half of his Cy Young Award winning season with the Tampa Bay Rays where he went off on one, and then he did the exact same thing with the San Diego Padres. He wasn't very good the first half of this past season, but then during the second half, he looked like the most dominant pitcher in all of baseball, and that's how he has 2 Cy Young Awards to his name, because he's had 2 hot second halves as a starting pitcher. Now, I know one of the teams that were linked to Blake Snell was the New York Yankees. And yes, I think the Yankees should have gone after Blake Snell for $150 million for 6 or 7 years. That's what I think they should have done. If they offered him that, that's fine. And now looking back at it, yes, it would make sense to have Blake Snell now that Garrett Cole was injured, but that didn't happen. And instead, the Yankees ended up with Marcus Stroman, who's an okay pitcher, but he's not as good as Blake Snell, obviously. I just feel like when it comes to Blake Snell, the sport itself told you how they feel about Blake Snell. They rejected a 2-time Cy Young Award winner. Just because they have the awards, they obviously don't view him in the likes of Pedro Martinez or Randy Johnson or those other names that I mentioned. They still view him as a little bit of an above-average pitcher. He's a guy notorious for not going super deep into games, and he walks a lot of batters. The fair criticism towards Scott Boras is how long he waits for his clients to sign a contract. It makes the baseball offseason unbearable. It drags on, and you can argue these free players could have gotten these contracts at the beginning of the offseason. The waiting game only looks brilliant when it pays off with massive deals. When it doesn't, you look bad and your clients look bad. And that's why right now Boras is looked upon as a villain in the sport. All free players were signed in March. That's way too late in the game. It gets to a point where baseball fans don't even care where these players end up anymore. At the beginning of the offseason, we're all hyped up and asking questions like, where is Blake Snell going to end up? But by the end, we just didn't care. We just wanted it to end. And that's not how the offseason should feel in any sport, let alone baseball. I also think this is one of those rare off seasons where Scott Boras was upstaged. There were other people out there. Shohei Ohtani signed the biggest contract in the history of the sport, and he's not represented by Scott Boras. And then the Dodgers made another massive move with Yamamoto, again, not linked to Scott Boras. So the two biggest deals were not Scott Boras clients. The Dodgers made all the waves, and none of the players they got were represented by Scott Boras. Without a doubt, this was a tough offseason for Scott Boras, but I am interested to see if he bounces back in a big way next offseason, because he's going to have two of the biggest clients, Mets first baseman Pete Alonso and Yankees outfielder Juan Soto. Now, Juan Soto is a great player. He's won a World Series with the Nationals. He was one of the lone bright spots of the Padres last season. I think he's one of the best hitters in all of baseball. He's an on-base machine, but this is a guy who rejected $400 million from the Washington Nationals. He's got to do better than that to justify saying no to that kind of money, and that puts a lot of pressure on Scott Boras. If Juan Soto has a breakout season with the Yankees and ends up with $500 million, then Scott Boras is going to look brilliant, and so is Juan Soto. If that doesn't happen, we're all going to revisit that, and that's going to be a tough look for Scott Boras, having his clients say no to over $400 million. And when it comes to Pete Alonso, I mean, he's the type of guy who could go for $100 million and I wouldn't be surprised, or he could go for $200 million. I mean, he is all power. He'll hit 45 home runs, but he struggles to hit 200 nowadays. I don't know what kind of money those kind of guys make anymore. The first baseman with power doesn't get massive contracts anymore. Is he going to get the Freddie Freeman deal with the Dodgers? I mean, Freeman got $160 million over 6 years. That's the type of deal I would expect from Pete Alonso. But if you're Scott Boras, you're obviously looking for more. And for Scott Boras, it's all about the years. He wants his clients to get the most amount of years. And I feel like teams are now pushing against that. I mean, the talks with Blake Snell was he was looking for 9 years, Cody Bellinger for 8 years, Jordan Montgomery for 6 years. These guys all basically ended up with 1-year contracts. He was asking for so many more years than teams were obviously willing to give them. Next offseason, he also has two other high-profile free agents. Pitcher Corbin Burnes, who is a former Cy Young Award winner. He's now with the Baltimore Orioles, who have a new ownership, so maybe the O's are going to give Corbin Burnes a massive contract, but he's going to be the best starting pitcher on next year's market. And this next guy is really interesting to me, Alex Bregman. He's a multiple-time World Series winner with the Houston Astros. He's one of the best third basemen in all of baseball, but he's 33 years old. I mean, what kind of money is Alex Bregman really going to get in the offseason? Is he going to get $100 million? Is he going to stay with the Houston Astros, or is another team going to jump in and break the bank to get Alex Bregman? I love Alex Bregman. He's won an MVP award. I just think he's closer to the twilight of his career, and I don't really want to extend myself to get him. Getting back to Juan Soto, it looks like the two New York teams are going to be the ones competing for Juan Soto's services in the future. I mean, if he has a breakout season with the Yankees, you would expect the Yankees be the ones who offer him over $400 million. I think the interesting thing is will the Yankees allow Juan Soto to make more money than Aaron Judge? And would that bother Aaron Judge? I mean, there were talks that the Yankees weren't going after Blake Snell because they wanted Garrett Cole to remain their highest paid pitcher. I don't believe those reports because Blake Snell signed for a lot less with the San Francisco Giants. So I think the Yankees were justified in not giving Blake Snell more money than Garrett Cole. And Garrett Cole is a way better pitcher than Blake Snell, in my opinion. I just think in the case of Juan Soto, it's interesting because he's only 25 years old. He's 4 years younger than Aaron Judge. You want Aaron Judge to play with another superstar player. You're going to want to keep Juan Soto around. And I think Aaron Judge would understand having a Yankee make more money than him. him. Aaron Judge is going to remain the face of the New York Yankees no matter what happens. I'm really interested to see if these free players who didn't get a lot of money this past offseason, Blake Snell, Cody Bellinger, and Jordan Montgomery, fare better next offseason. Now, for that to happen, they're going to have really good seasons. If I had to pick the player of those three who I think is going to have the best season and have the best chance to make a lot of money next offseason, it's Cody Bellinger. I just think he's in the right situation. He's with a good Chicago Cubs team. They're now managed by Craig Counsell, who I think is one of the best managers in the sport. I think Cody Bellinger is going to have an all-star caliber season for the Chicago Cubs, and maybe by the end of the year, we will view him once again as an MVP candidate. In the case of Jordan Montgomery, I just will never view him as a guy I would want to give $100 million for. He's an okay pitcher. He's a number 3 pitcher. He's on a really good Diamondbacks team. Maybe he could win 13 to 15 games, and that could get him a chance to make some more money. But I just don't view him as a guy that I want to give $100 million to. I know that doesn't mean what it used to mean. I know $100 million isn't the end-all, be-all. He's just not that type of player to me. He's not that much of a difference maker. Yes, I like the idea of having a starter pitcher who gets better come postseason time, but at some point he needs to produce more during the regular season. The guy has never won more than 10 games during the regular season. I can't give a guy like that $20 million. I will say this, if he duplicates what he did last postseason, this postseason with the Diamondbacks, then he is going to get paid, because when you become a multiple-time postseason performer, that's when you make a lot of money. That's what happened with Nathan Eovaldi and the Texas Rangers. The Rangers paid for Nathan Eovaldi because of what he did for the Boston Red Sox, and then he did it again for the Texas Rangers. That might be the thing that gets Jordan Montgomery paid, if he becomes a guy who consistently ups his game during October. And when it comes to Blake Snell, I just don't know what would change teams' opinions on him. If you don't view Blake Snell as an ace right now, will you ever view Blake Snell as an ace? I mean, he could possibly win a 3rd Cy Young Award with the San Francisco Giants, and I still believe there would be teams out there hesitant to give this guy a long-term contract. Getting back to Scott Boras, I don't know what all of this means for him long-term. I mean, this is a guy who's made enough money in the sport of baseball. I think we're all just interested to see if he remains a prevalent figure in the sport, or if this is the beginning of the end. I don't think it is. I think he's going to continue to have big name clients. What I do want to come out of all of this and what's gone on for the past few baseball off seasons is for there to be an off season window, like an urgency. I want it to be like a 2-week period where all the deals get signed, like it is for the NFL and the NBA. That's what makes those off seasons so great, because there's the intrigue. There's the, is my team going to make a move? And the day that your team doesn't make a move, you know that they didn't make a move. You don't need to wait 5 months to see if they're going to make that move or not. Baseball fans want that instant gratification when it comes to the offseason. Really, the baseball offseason should be built around the winter meetings. I mean, we all watch the winter meetings and nothing big usually happens. I mean, sometimes there are big deals that happen there, but most of the time it's all for nothing. They should make that week the week of free agency. That should be the window. And Boras is one of the biggest reasons why it's not. He is one of these people who wants the offseason to drag on and on so his clients can walk away with the contracts that he wants them to get and they want. I understand the game that he's made. It's worked out. It's why he doesn't want things to change. But maybe he's learning that things don't work the way that they used to. Maybe it would benefit him if there was a window. Maybe if there was a window this offseason, his clients, Blake Snell, Cody Bellinger, and Jordan Montgomery, would have walked away with better deals. Because if you believe the reports, Blake Snell rejected $150 million. That doesn't sound like a great idea, because I personally don't see Blake Snell ever being the type of pitcher who's going to warrant a $200 million contract. I get it, he's a two-time Cy Young Award winner, he has the awards, but clearly the sport is telling you how they feel about him. Next offseason, what we're going to learn is, are teams sick and tired of negotiating with Scott Boras, or was this past offseason an exception and things will go back to the way that they were with Scott Boras on top? I'm really interested to see, because from the time I've watched baseball since about 2007, that's when I first started to really get into baseball, Scott Boras has been a signature name. He has represented some of the biggest clients the sport has ever known. And he's someone that everyone has strong opinions about because he's been such a force in the sport. Again, he's gotten your team to give out ridiculous amounts of money to his clients. Whether it was his fault or not, this past offseason was not his finest work. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.